All right, let's jump right in. We're looking at a fascinating framework from Dr. Zeynep Hafez called risk-calibrated multilateralism. Now, the core idea here is pretty bold. It says that our current way of handling global cooperation, which is, built on consensus and old rules, is just fundamentally out of sync with the world we actually live in. So what's needed isn't just another policy tweak. Nope, it's about engineering a whole new way of building global governance right from the ground up.
So where do we even begin? Well, we start by getting a really clear picture of the problem. This first section is all about understanding the complex, interconnected reality we're all navigating right now.
And this quote just sets the stage perfectly. It comes from Rania Al-Mashat, speaking after the 2026 Munich Security Conference, and it hits the nail on the head. Global risks are no longer isolated events. They are structurally interconnected. And that's not just some academic theory, right? This is an observation coming from the highest levels of global strategy.
And you can see just how interconnected things are right here. Think about it for a second. A disruption in our energy systems, it doesn't just stay in the energy sector. It immediately cascades, hitting our supply chains. And that, in turn, can totally reshape economic corridors and even spark major shifts in geopolitical alignments. A single point of failure can send shockwaves across the entire global system. It's wild.
This brings us to a really fundamental and, frankly, a pretty unsettling question. When we look at the international systems we've built, the ones meant to manage the world, were they actually designed to handle this level of constant, rolling disruption? Or were they really built for a much simpler, more predictable era? And that very question shines a spotlight on what this framework calls the institutional gap. See, what we're experiencing isn't just a bit of fragmentation or a few temporary crises. It's actually the exposure of a deep, structural flaw in the very design of our global institutions. And this slide really gets to the heart of the conflict. On one hand, you've got procedural compliance. That's our current model. It's all about checklists, fixed rules, and just following the established procedures. But on the other hand, the world we actually live in demands adaptive resilience. That's the ability to flex, to change, and to respond to shocks in real time. We're still trying to operate with that old model while the world is screaming for the new one. So, if the old architecture is failing us, what's the solution? This is where we shift gears from just diagnosing the problem to actually laying out a blueprint for a new system. And this isn't about some vague philosophy. It's about a deliberately engineered framework called structural intelligence. Let's take a look.
All right, so let's look at the blueprint and see how this thing is built layer by layer. The absolute foundation, step one, is a risk-based policy architecture. What does that mean? It means we embed risk analysis directly into the policy itself. So instead of creating a policy and then trying to figure out the risks later, the risk analysis is the policy. It's baked into the DNA of the system from the very beginning.
Okay, so building on that foundation, we get to the operational engine of the system. This involves integrating established frameworks like COSO ERM and ISO 31000. Now, you don't need to be an expert on these, but just know they're basically the global gold standards for how organizations should manage risk. The key takeaway here is that we're moving away from simple checklists and toward a system of dynamic risk intelligence that can actually learn and adapt as it goes.
Now that we have the engine, the system needs a navigation system, right? That's layer 3, strategic foresight alignment. This is all about using data and forward-looking analysis to get ahead of future trends and challenges. Instead of just reacting to crises after they've already happened, this allows entire ecosystems, we're talking markets, supply chains, innovation, to be proactively aligned for whatever's coming down the pike.
And finally, what's the whole point of this entire engineered structure? Well, that's layer 4. It's about putting humanity right at the center of it all. This means we have to reassess everything, from our economic geography and how we distribute resources to something as fundamental as food security, all through this lens of systemic risk, to ensure human stability. Not just abstract economic numbers, but real human stability.
Now, to build a system like this, we have to redefine a word we hear all the time: resilience. In this context, it's not just about being flexible or bouncing back. It means something much more specific, something measurable. It means building true institutional capacity. True, systemic resilience starts right here, with the institutional capacity to anticipate. This is the ability to actually see future shocks and systemic stresses forming on the horizon before they fully hit. Next up, once a shock does arrive, because let's be honest, some always will, the system has to have the capacity to absorb the impact. It needs to be able to take the hit without completely shattering or collapsing.
And this leads us to the final, and maybe the most powerful capacity, the ability to strategically reconfigure under pressure. Now, this isn't just about bouncing back to how things were. It's about adapting, evolving, and actually emerging from the disruption stronger and more intelligent than before. That's the real game changer.
So when you put all three of those powerful ideas together, you get this new definition. Systemic resilience is the institutional capacity to anticipate, absorb, and strategically reconfigure under pressure. That right there, that is the goal of this entire architecture.
So let's tie it all together. What does this all mean for the future of cooperation? What is the big takeaway from this whole engineered approach to global stability?
Well, it boils down to this, and this is a really crucial point. The future of global cooperation will not be negotiated into existence. It will be structurally engineered through intelligent governance systems. The ultimate thesis is that we can't just talk our way to a more stable future. We actually have to build it deliberately and intelligently. And that powerful vision is brought to us by Dr. Zainab Hafez, a governance strategist who's dedicated her work to bridging the crucial gaps between science, policy, and sustainable development. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.